you're just gonna, it's just gonna be a pain, in my opinion, and from experience.
So what's your recommend, like, forget Mac Mini, get like proper laptop?
Get a proper Mac. Work on the Mac.
Afford it, yeah.
Yeah, if you can afford it. The other thing I really like about my Mac is it's much better on battery than Windows for most basic tasks. So I can charge my Mac up and have it last like 5 or 6 hours if I'm not doing anything too crazy on it. Whereas on Windows, the most I would ever get out of a Windows laptop is maybe 3 hours. That's like with a brand new laptop, not doing much with it.
That's true. Take Microsoft Surface, actually, it's 8 hours.
With the Surface, it's 8 hours. The Surface doesn't have a quad-core processor, or now the new Surface books do, but they're just brand new. I'm using a laptop that has this form factor and this almost identical to this model. Has been around since 2013. So I'm a Windows guy. I always have been. I still am, really. Still spend a fair bit of time in Windows, but Windows runs in parallels. It feels just like Windows. It's
awesome.
Yeah. Feels like you're running on the metal. So, trying to figure out what summer is going to look like. Who's interested in July and August sessions? Show of hands. Who would come out to a July session or August? Almost everybody? Okay, we'll just continue. Some user groups take a break through the summer just because interest kind of wanes and they don't see very good turnout. I'd like to keep going, so if people are going to keep coming out, keep hosting the event.
So like me going down, so you're going to do weekends.
Yeah.
Just keep it long.
Yeah. Yeah, just split.
What are all these HTML can't?
It's just commenting at the maximize button on the stupid dialogues after the ship and Sharon was saying.
Oh, I didn't look at what she was saying.
Oh, all it was she hit the maximize on like the, are you sure you want to create a fake SSN? And it was messed up. And she said, why do you have these on here? I was just doing it to shut her up. Yeah, I don't know if there's any audio. I suspect it's just machine. Oh, shit. All right, the audio is working. Justin heard that.
Perfect. Thanks, Matt.
Where's
Live stream.
Yeah. Sorry. I think this is our first proper live stream.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's that? Sure. Been through this enough times now that you got it. It's in the slide chart.
Okay, I'll get it.
Yeah. Here's another question. Who works in a company that has more than 100 employees? Okay, interesting.
How many employees does he assign?
40.
40.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, we're growing too. So if you asked me that 6 months ago, I probably would have said 30.
Do you have just offices in Toronto or like all over?
All of them.
40 just in Toronto?
No. 40 across the country and the United States.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
we're at 24 in Toronto now, I think?
Yeah, 24.
Original?
It's weird. I was the 22nd employee, like less than a year.
That's crazy.
Insane.
Yeah, I was 12.
But you were there,
3.5
I was
years.
going to say, 2 years before me.
What's your name?
ECU.
Does me too. I'm from Poland version.
Yeah, go ahead.
What you just want?
Xamarin.
Perfect.
Is this the right? Dylan, is that set correctly to hit you the best?
What's that?
Is that set correctly to hit you the best? Setup? Justin's just saying.
This one is.
Okay. Justin, we're trying to change the mic if that helps.
How about sound check? Yeah? Might be better now. Well, now it's only going to pick up at the front of the room. We've been trying to get a live stream going since day one, and I think today we finally have one.
Meaning that it's live posted on our net.
Yeah, it's on YouTube.
Okay.
Yeah. Which is cool. Yeah, I tweeted it out. Daniel tweeted it, and then I sent it out on the official account. Yep. Can you check your user counts? Did you get any of that?
3.
3?
At least one of them.
One of them was me, probably.
It's Justin.
We'll get started in just a few minutes here. I think we have a pretty full house anyways. It's good. What do you think of the space so far? So this is our first time at HackerU. It seems nice. Like this. Started a little early. Why not? So, welcome everyone. I'm Dylan O'Berry. This is Daniel Causer. We're the co-hosts, co-organizers of the Toronto Mobile.net developers. Operating for, this is our 9th? No, we missed last month. Yeah. So we're trying to make sure we maintain the cadence. I think this is going to be our spot every time now at HackerU, so we'll talk about that now. So yeah, we always meet the third Tuesday of the month at 6 p.m. We're trying out HackerU for the first time today. So far, so good. So I think we'll continue to hold the meetings here. So this address, where you are here today, this is where we'll be from now on. I hope. I'll let everybody know if that changes. So first up, we'll talk about our upcoming meeting. So we're going to have Madi from Microsoft. If anybody was here for the January meetup, Madi covered App Center. He's going to cover some automated UI testing for mobile. Madi is extremely proficient with Xamarin and App Center and UI testing, and he's great. Always good for questions and discussion around the ecosystem. So that'll be on June 19th, right back here again. And yeah, BSI Labs, our sponsor, our employer. Open call for speakers. We are always interested in hearing what you have to say about mobile. Hey, Scott, welcome.
Thank you.
So if you've got something that you're interested in presenting to the group, let me know. Could be big, could be small. Like even if you want to come up here and demo something that you're proud of for 5 minutes, let me know and we'll get you up here in front of the group. It's always good to hear somebody else's perspective on things. Yeah, so anything surrounding mobile, it doesn't necessarily have to be Xamarin specific or super technical. If you want to talk about like adoption rates, or if you want to talk about how to analyze metrics, or if you want to talk about UX patterns, or if you want to talk about whatever it may be, anything involving mobile, we're very much open to having those kind of concepts discussed here. Connect with us, please follow us on Twitter. I'm most active on Twitter. I run the account, try and tweet as much relevant content out as possible. You can also follow my personal account, that's a little later. We've got the Meetup group on here, our GitHub repo. We've become a lot more active thanks to Daniel on GitHub. You'll see an example of that coming up. Our YouTube, which we are live on YouTube for the first time today, which is awesome. And we have a WhatsApp group that we just have all kinds of random discussion on. People post links in there, ask questions. There's good stuff in there.
Sharing content as well.
Yeah, lots of content sharing, idea sharing. So that's always good. This slide deck will be available on the GitHub. So all you have to remember is Toronto mobile developers on GitHub, and everything will be contained on there. Thanks very much to our sponsor. They provide space, me, Daniel, food, time for us to organize. So BSI Labs, we're a full-service enterprise mobile development shop. So that means if you need help with developing apps, you can call us, and we'll make sure we get some good people in to help you if you need help. So that's everything from development help, like if you need help in one specific area, you need a developer, all the way to building a mobile strategy and helping you build your app from the ground up. And you can follow some BSI Labs, some good content there too, and our website at bsilabs.ca. We try and post relevant blog content. Particularly, I've been focusing on writing a whole bunch of articles. I've gotten a queue about best practices around building mobile-first apps and enterprise apps. So be sure to check that out. A little plug for our related group, the main .NET group. If you haven't been out to one of their meetings, they do a very good job, but they hold their meetings at the Microsoft headquarters. Their next meeting coming up is NoSQL for .NET and the Azure event grid. It's like 2 separate topics, 2 separate presenters, so probably lots of good stuff in there. All right, no further ado. So we're going to cover 3 topics today. We're going to cover a library that Daniel and I have worked on. Welcome. Called HttpTracer. This is a little utility library that'll help you with your development tasks. We'll recap Microsoft Build Conference. There's a lot to cover in there. They talked about a lot of different things. I was able to go to the conference. There's a couple other people in the room, Peter and Oscar, who were at the conference. Feel free to chime in and if you've seen something that I've missed or anything around those lines. But there's a lot of material there. So I've tried to my whole experience around Build was trying to tailor it for this meeting and make sure that I could disperse as much knowledge related to mobile development as possible. And then we'll talk about Xamarin.Forms 3.0, which was announced as being final. So it's actually released in public and you can use Forms 3.0.
If I'm not mistaken, the templates for Xamarin apps on Visual Studio for Mac are already using 3.0.
Yeah, and Visual Studio 15.7 for PC too.
Yeah.
You want to introduce yourself?
Oh yeah, this is me, guys, Daniel John. I've been around developing all types of apps and web apps as well for around 7 years. I'm working BSI Labs. I'm also a Planet Xamarin community author. That basically means that I have a blog and I write about Xamarin. And I'm also part of this content aggregator that basically pulls all of the Xamarin content of people in the community that contribute. It basically grabs everything together, so you have this channel of a lot of information about mobile, which is really cool. I'm a Xamarin certified developer. I've been developing apps with Xamarin for 2.5 years, 3 years now. You can follow me at Daniel Causer on Twitter. I'm also very active in Twitter now, since a few months ago. So yeah, that's it.
And I'm Dylan Berry. I also work for BSI Labs. I've around 4 years of mobile development experience. About 3 of those years are using pure Xamarin. The rest before that was kind of hobby development, so I kind of knew my way around, but didn't do anything serious. I tweet a lot. You might not want to follow me if you don't want your feed taken over. Yeah, let's get started. Right away.
So what is HttpTracer, right? I think the name should stand for what it does. Basically, we have this tool in BSI where makes it easy for us to debug all of the request and response that our apps do through the network. Has anybody ever used the Fiddler here to trace? So our idea was to make something. So we had this little library, internal library. It's basically a HTTP handler that intercepts every request that we do through our HTTP client. So we wanted to make it easier for the community. Like we loved this too, and we really thought that it would be helpful to share that with everyone. So basically, the philosophy is to make our lives easier when trying to get the content of the responses that we're setting to our servers, or getting the headers of the requests and the responses. The default behavior of this library is to dump everything in the Visual Studio output. We were careful to make the logger an interface, so you basically can put anything you want in it. If you want to dump this information in a text file in your machine, or do whatever you want with it, you have that power for it. It's a multi-targeted lib. You can use it for Xamarin for Mac, Xamarin iOS, Xamarin Android, .NET Standard 2, .NET Core. You can basically use it everywhere you want. Yeah. It's easy to use. We wanted to make it as easy as possible. So as of right now, you only need to instantiate our class in your HTTP client. That's all on the constructor. That's all you need to do, and it will automatically start dumping all of the information in your console of your Visual Studio. If you happen to have in your application already HTTP handlers that you use, we also made an interface, a builder class that you can use to make it easy to use HttpTracer. Yeah, and it's an OSS. It stands for open source software. Our idea was to, with this little thing, this little tool, was to instigate the Toronto community to step up and do things I mean, who in here has a GitHub account? Awesome, almost everybody. So I bet all of you guys have contributed a lot before, and we really want to get everybody engaged, working together on an open source project. Not only this, but whatever ideas or tools you guys use, we can gather together and implement it and throw it out there in the wild, in the NuGet wild. So I'm actually going to do a demo, a real fast, simple demo right now. Just to show.
Of course I didn't listen.
So here it is. So here we're using the basic setup right here. This is.
People in the back see the text. You might want to make it.
Oh yeah, can you guys see the text in the back?
If you can make it a little
No?
better,
Okay.
a little bit bigger.
How do I begin with this bigger?
I think it's Command plus, right?
Nice. All right. Awesome. So here we have a Xamarin, simple template Xamarin app. This is binded to command in our XAML. It creates an HTTP client class with our class instantiated in its constructor. That's all you need to do. Download the NuGet package from NuGet, and you can get your stack, your network traces all dumped into your Visual Studio console. Here, I also made a sample of this being dumped in the logger. So I'm together with our class, we're sending through a logger. This little guy is a class over here that implements an iLogger interface that we made available. This guy basically has this method called log. And then in here, I'm creating a text file that will receive all of the trace. Just a little sample of what it does. So let's start this puppy. Okay, so we have the output. This is Visual Studio for Mac, but it should be the same for Visual Studio for Windows. See, I click the button and we have all of the information of our request. I just added a whole bunch of headers, so just so you could see. So we have the headers being dumped, and we have the URL that we're querying. And then in here, right back, we have the response 200. Means that it's okay, it was all fine. We queried the URL, we got all of this header back, and we have the JSON of the response, which is really cool. You can just dump this in Visual Studio Code, format it, and you're good to go. So I'm also gonna go and press this guy, which should dump all of the information to a text file.
Fifth icon.
There. We open it here. So where is it? Oh, here it is. Awesome. So here it is. Everything dumped. So just so you guys see that I'm not actually lying, I will click it again and it will throw a whole bunch of information here. Hey, see? This was cool because at BSI we were having some kind of trouble, like the console was starting to be very dirty. So it would get annoying after a while. So we just made this interface to for you guys to do whatever you want with it.
Or if you want to persist logs and send it back to a central location or something like that,
Yep.
you have the option to do that. So if you're doing, I wouldn't recommend, actually, I'll get into this. You should jump back into it.
So, all right, so this is really simple. We have all of the code in GitHub, and this might be the next steps for this tool. We're not sure yet because we want the community to thrive this project. So this is our idea of what could be the next steps for it. One is cover types of like when you're uploading files and things like that. You might want to know what file you're sending in your request, and I don't know, maybe have a path of your local of where that path of where that file is stored in your device, or I don't know, I'm not sure yet.
Size and bytes,
yeah.
MIME type.
Yeah.
Things we could pull out the headers potentially. The second item I want to talk on that. So we find that with apps like this, it's important to be able to replay some of your customers' issues. So a lot of the time you'll see something break, you won't exactly know what's going on, but you'll have an error and not really know what the state was like surrounding that. So one of the concepts that we have actually in our internal tool has some more features than this that we're going to roll into this version. But to toggle at runtime the logging verbosity, so be able to go from don't log anything to log all requests with just the headers, or log all requests with the headers and or all requests and responses. So different ways of logging the requests, so you don't fill up a log file or add too much overhead to the process, but still are able to capture what you need to determine what was going on the client's device when you encountered the error. So that kind of stuff is pretty important, and yeah, we'll do some of that.
Also, another idea was maybe to make a Visual Studio extension, so we could have our own like console with colors, everything pretty. Maybe a fiddler alike, but not exactly a fiddler.
Yeah, be able to replay requests, things like that.
Yep. So again, just a call for contributors. We started with this library, but really we want to hear your thoughts. We want to help you with things you want to try, things you want to publish. This was actually the first library I've ever published in NuGet, so it was an awesome experience to have Dylan and our other friend Chase Floro and be working on this project together. So yeah, come forward and let's build some software.
Yeah. I can't understate the value of that tool. Yeah, if you're doing any client-server requests, it's pretty much essential. Okay, into Microsoft Build. From what I've kind of heard from you, people weren't paying super close attention, so that's good. This will all be new. I'll talk just for a second about my personal experience. This is my first time going to Build. It was a lot of fun, pretty hectic. Got to see a bit of Seattle, really nice there. So one of the biggest thing that I found is the expo floor. So when you're between sessions, you can go around from booth to booth and actually talk to the Microsoft team members that are working on products. So I took all my gripes, got them all together, all my grievances, everything that was driving me nuts with the different tools, and went and harassed everybody on the expo floor. So got some good responses, some not so good, mostly good though, so that was good. A lot of networking opportunities, chances to connect with other people is always great. Get exposed to some new technology, kind of see where the vision for Microsoft is headed. We tried a hands-on session, that was mixed results, but you have the opportunity for that, and then they kind of sent us off with a party at the Seattle Center, which was pretty cool. And swag. That brown paper bag up at the front is filled with swag. I will put it on the table afterwards, and you can help yourself. So there's t-shirts and badges and stickers, and I got outfitted with all my new stickers here. Very happy about that. I was lacking on stickers. I've always had my trusty Xamarin sticker, but I've got one for Prism, Mono, .NET Foundation, App Center, and Merge Conflict, which is awesome. Yeah, so that was really good. Okay, let's talk about the keynote a little bit. So did anybody catch anything from the keynote? Any highlights, anything? No? All right, it was super high level. Satya talked about like what Microsoft is doing, focusing on privacy, making sure everybody's concerned about privacy because of Facebook and everything that's going on there, people selling data, all that. Trying to maintain connectivity across all your devices, so everything that they're using, they kind of want a piece of that, but it seems a little half-baked to me. We'll see where they head. They're talking about empathy and accessibility, trying to get your app in front of audiences that you might not be considering. I don't know if anybody's seen the use case within Microsoft. They have a developer that's blind. I actually got an opportunity to meet that gentleman. He's a nice guy and has some very unique perspectives and different experience, so that's always cool. They're empowering developers to really provide them with tools, provide us with tools to get the job done more effectively. One of those is open source. A lot of emphasis on open source, which is nice to see. I don't know, has anybody ever like really gotten into, we're all kind of, who's Microsoft background and who's not? So who comes from like I've worked with Microsoft tools almost exclusively all the time. So that's most of us. So I know from my perspective, I'm still not quite used to the flow of going and getting source code and going and looking behind the covers and seeing how things are working. You can do that with like almost all their stack now, like almost all their software. So when I have a problem now, instead of going, this thing's broken, and trying to code around it, I actually see what's going on. I go and look at the code, I clone the repo locally and go through it. I'll do a little more on that later. So the Microsoft ecosystem, I think we all know this at this point, it's focused very heavily in Azure and their cloud offerings. So they've got all kinds of stuff around the Azure Sphere, which is the hybrid approach, the Azure Stack, which is like Azure in a box, Gavin Belson's signature edition. IoT was a big theme. So Internet of Things, they now have something called IoT Edge, where you can train a model using their cognitive services and deploy it to a very small footprint, so like a Raspberry Pi or smaller than that. Pretty cool technology, gives a little bit more flexibility to IoT devices that aren't always connected. So that's pretty cool, a lot of opportunity there. A lot of emphasis on AI and cognitive services and the machine learning models and all that stuff. So yeah, that's the direction they're kind of pointed in. My beef with this is they didn't talk about Xamarin, they didn't talk about mobile strategy, almost, like just so thin. And that was actually on day 2. They talked about their new strategy for Microsoft 365. Their answer for mobile is Edge and a launcher, I guess. I don't know, not great. Not a lot of talk about Xamarin. I expressed my displeasure to everybody who would hear me on the expo floor.
And on Twitter.
And on Twitter and everywhere else. So yeah, I'm hoping that they come forward with a stronger mobile foot forward in the future. We'll see what happens. Into the things we care about. So Visual Studio. This is a big one, Visual Studio Live Share. Who has seen this? Who has played with this? This, I said that this is one of the best IDE features that I've seen in my career. I stand by that. It's extremely cool, and we're going to demo it for you right now. It works with the new version of Visual Studio, so if you don't have the new bits, get the new bits, or Visual Studio Code on Mac or Windows. Now, I have a favor to ask from everyone right now. I'm going to bring up a link. I'd very much like you to go and upvote this extension to be worked on for Visual Studio for Mac. I work with Visual Studio for Mac all the time, and I don't have this code share feature, and it bothers me. And they've got a GitHub issue, and I'd very much like it if everybody could go and upvote that issue. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to be annoying. I have this somewhere easier.
I'm sending the link to you.
Ah, perfect. Slack?
Yep.
Cool. Oh, is that the share link?
Yeah.
Can you grab the GitHub link?
For
There on it? The GitHub link for the GitHub issue that I had sent out?
Ah, okay.
Yeah. I could grab it too, I guess. Okay, so what I'm going to do, Daniel has a project up on his machine. So he's running Visual Studio. He has the extension installed. I'm running Visual Studio. I have Visual Studio for Code and Visual Studio for Windows. I'll actually show you both. So he has sent me a link. So what I'll do, you'll see why I want you to upvote this issue as soon as you see this in action.
You have to do the same network.
Yeah, you don't have to be on the same network, no. Just give me a sec, I'll minimize the presentation. You can see how this is working.
I'm also going to send it to Matt.
Cool.
He's going to join the session with us.
Okay, so Daniel sent me a link. I've clicked the link. Is now prompting me to join a collaboration session with Daniel. And it's giving me, I've got the extension installed. It knows this, and it's prompting me to open this link with Visual Studio for Code. So I'm going to open this with Visual Studio for Code, or Visual Studio Code. It's launching, signing in, joining, opening remote session.
Okay.
Is this all that's in your workspace? Are we getting classic demo fail here? We ran through this 2 or 3 times earlier.
Okay. Share it again.
Okay. Close this down again.
Right, just send it to you on Slack again.
Okay. Okay. Fingers crossed. It's funny, we've actually been using this not just for demo, but actually using it for like for working. And it's worked great until we try and demo it. Nope. Okay, so what I'll do is an alternative.
Just said that some of my files were not shared.
Oh, interesting. Okay, I'm going to open a solution here. I'm going to open ProTracker. ProTracker, if you haven't seen it on our GitHub, is
It's just a template of an app. No?
yeah, it's a really basic app that does a few different things. We have a few branches that do a few different things. So what I'll do is I'm going to share this to myself. So I'm on my Windows machine in my Windows VM. I'm going to generate a sharing link from here, and I'm going to share it through Visual Studio for Code, or share it with myself on my Mac. Okay, so I have it on my clipboard. I'm going to go back over here, close this tab.
Can you see it, Matt? Oh, Matt got it.
Matt got it.
Problem is you, man.
If this doesn't work, I'm going to cry. I won't cry. I'll send an angry note to Microsoft.
There it is.
Okay, here we go. So I have shared a Xamarin project from my PC, and actually I'll send this to Daniel too, just so you can kind of see how it looks from another perspective. So I've shared a Xamarin project from my PC to Visual Studio Code. Visual Studio Code doesn't have the ability to work on Xamarin projects yet. I could be involved with a debug session with somebody running a Xamarin project. It actually has Visual Studio built a tunnel between the two instances, or multiple instances, as Matt's connected to Daniel. And you can actually have a shared debugging session where you can set breakpoints and see what's in the watch window and set your own watch variables. You can edit code on a remote machine. It's pretty incredible. So like, let's just go into, so I can edit a file here. Let's go into one of the views. Just gonna add a label here. So I've added a label, simple text. We'll go over here, and I'm gonna look at who's sharing. Where is that? Here. So I'm sharing. It shows me where I am, where the other person is, and where the cursor is set. So you can see the cursor right here, and I've written hello world. So it's super useful for collaborating and doing paired sessions. You can even have more than 2 people involved in a session. Really, really useful tool. Clearly has a few faults. Daniel, you want to go play with some code?
I just looked at, I'm going to change my details to and.
So just nothing behind the curtain.
Yep.
So you can see Daniel's cursor is here. So really, really great collaboration feature. I'm really excited about it because a lot of the time a screen sharing session doesn't exactly get what you want. You can't navigate and look at other files. You can't look at the whole solution structure the way you could if you were navigating the solution yourself. That being said, it doesn't load at the solution level. It actually gives you the file view for where the root of the solution is. That's useful enough from what I can see. So I'm sure they'll continue to evolve and improve this, but for right now, really great function, really great functionality for a pre-release product. I recommend everybody trying it out. So it's a quick extension, download. You can just Google for Visual Studio Live Share and install it on your install it in Visual Studio for Code for Mac or Windows, or Visual Studio 15.7 for Windows. Did you send me that link for? Did somebody send me that link?
I did. It's on Slack.
Okay, so
I don't know if Dylan mentioned, but with this live share, you don't have to have all of the SDKs that the person that is sharing the session with you has. So Dylan might be a Xamarin developer with all of the environment set up in his machine, and I can just connect to his machine and not have all of the SDKs, all of the Android SDK, all of that. And we'll be still able to share a session and do debug session and all of this awesome stuff that we just saw together.
yeah, it's a really powerful feature. Just bear with me for a second. I'm looking for a link because I'd like you all to upvote the Visual Studio for Mac issue. Who uses Visual Studio for Mac? Yeah, I basically it's my primary tool at this point, and the fact that it doesn't have this makes me just a little sad. So I've been trying to recruit everybody to upvote the live share issue on GitHub. So if you go to, I'll actually just get back out of the presentation. If you go to GitHub/Microsoft Docs/live-share/issues/91, sorry about the link, I should have started it. But if you give this a thumbs up, they'll pay more attention to this. This is basically, in Microsoft's open source world, you give this a thumbs up, this will move it to the top of their backlog. So the more thumbs up this has, the better. And the more chance of it actually getting worked on. I actually talked to the Microsoft staff and I said, why didn't you put this in Visual Studio for Mac? Please help us. We need, you're supposed to be Works Anywhere company now. Please put it in Visual Studio for Mac. So they said, go and upvote it. And I said, okay. And they're trying to get as many people to upvote it as possible. refreshing to see if anybody's already notified. All right, I'll come back to that after. All right, I will quickly send this out on Twitter. That might be slightly easier. No, I won't. I'm not signing. Okay, anyways, back into the presentation. So that was the biggest Visual Studio feature that was announced, in my opinion. They were so big that they put it in the technical keynote, so they had Scott Guthrie and Scott Hanselman on stage doing a demo of it. It was pretty cool to see. Yeah, already demo that. Okay, into more Visual Studio stuff. Visual Studio 15.7, they're focusing on performance again, very much so. So they compared 15.6 to 15.7 with branch switching and a cold start, and it's much, much faster. I actually see it. So I updated on late last week to 15.7, and actually I updated yesterday morning to 15.7.1. And I'm very, very pleased with the performance. If you're using ReSharper, you might want to try turning it off and using some of the out-of-the-box features. I'm a ReSharper junkie, and I'm trying to fly without ReSharper because of the huge speed improvements, performance improvements you get without running ReSharper. We've also really improved the refactoring tools. They're basically, when we talk to them about Visual Studio performance, actually my colleague Peter talked to them, and they said most performance issues are now stemming from ReSharper. So if you're running ReSharper, try running without it. Just see if your life is okay without it, because it's so much faster. These next two are pretty big. This is a ReSharper feature that I leaned on. If I wanted to look at how something was working in a DLL that was not open source, I would use ReSharper to decompile that and look at the code. Now it's built into Visual Studio. It's in the options, you can go and turn it on. Great feature. Even better than that, if something is open source, the NuGet package should specify where that open source project lives. If you navigate to the source of a open source NuGet link project, NuGet reference, it'll take you to the source code. It'll actually download the source file that backs up that library you're looking at, and you can browse the source right in Visual Studio. No context switching, it just does it. Just bang, you've got that file on your system. Amazing feature, really, really fantastic. Just makes our lives that much easier. So I don't have to clone a whole repo to look at a file and navigate it. I can just start clicking through Visual Studio and it'll get the files that I need for me. Kind of on the same note, IntelliCode is very interesting. IntelliCode is, they've taken their cognitive services libraries and unleashed it on the top star projects on GitHub. They have done all kind of heuristic analysis models on it to figure out which method calls and which properties are used most. So in your IntelliSense, it'll bump them to the top of the list. And it also learns from how you code and how you use certain libraries within your projects and bump those to the top of the list. So it's super smart, learns about how people are actually using the libraries. I'm sure they're going to use that for other purposes to actually drive the developer experience even further. So that's great. This one's an extension. You have to actually go out and install the preview extension, but very useful. Next up, some debugging improvements. So this one's pretty key too. This allows you to basically move your debug pointer up in this, or backwards in the call stack. So you can step back into or reverse continue. And this is not like dragging your current runtime pointer up to where it was before. It actually will reverse the state. So it uses IntelliTrace behind the scenes. Has anybody ever done an IntelliTrace debug session where you replayed something from a different environment? So what it basically does is it captures all the information, all the runtime state at every line of code. So anytime it executes IL, it captures that state. What this does is it bakes it into the IDE so you can actually reverse and start from any other point in your execution. So super cool, makes debugging even easier. Awesome tool. We have some Visual Studio for Mac users in the crowd, so I'm very happy about this. there's now Team Foundation version control. So if you're not using Git, there's now official support for Team Foundation version control. So if you're using old school, like server-driven TFVC, it's in preview, supported, baked right into the Visual Studio for Mac instance. You have to get a preview release though. So if you're still using that, I used to fight with the tools around this years ago. I wish it was there before. Now I don't really care, but if you are still using Team Foundation version control, super helpful. It respects editor config. So if you're using solution-wide standards for how you want your code to be formatted, Visual Studio respects that and will follow those rules that you define in editor config. There's also support for Azure Functions and TypeScript, which is great if you're doing any kind of cross-platform web development or anything like that. And there's the whole list of all kinds of things that they're doing with Visual Studio for Mac. They're definitely putting attention into this. So again, they look to the community to drive features. So if you're looking for something, you can reach out to the Visual Studio for Mac team. They're pretty available on GitHub and Twitter, and will respond to feedback. They want to make this a first-class IDE. So yeah, if you're not using Visual Studio for Mac, you should give it a try. It's quite good. Actually, aside from some of the refactoring tools, I think it's a better IDE because it's so fast. Okay, on to everyone's favorite language, I hope, C#. So in the last 12 months, they've been doing point releases. This is new for C#. C# used to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now they've gone 7, and in the last 12 months, they've done 7.0, 7.1, 7.2, 7.3. There's some good stuff in there, some generics improvements, some work around tuples. I don't use tuples too much, but I know some people love them. You can now return a reference. Span T is a little bit of an oddball because it doesn't fit with .NET standards, so it doesn't necessarily impact Xamarin development as much. But that's interesting and will come to .NET Standard 2.1, I believe. If you want to use Span T right now in .NET Framework libraries, you have to include a NuGet package. There's a bunch of documentation on that. For anybody who doesn't know about Span T, it's basically a more efficient, or can be used to make arrays more efficient, or collections more efficient. So that's pretty cool. And stack allocation is, you can actually access data on the stack in a managed format. So there's a keyword in C# now that you can do that. I don't know much about this, so don't ask me about it, but there's documentation online. They showed off some new, this is pretty small, but I tried to cram it all in one slide. They showed off some future C# features, so some C# 8 features that will be coming soon, as well as some experiments that they're doing with C#. So all this stuff is really cool, makes your code smaller, more terse, less ceremony, all that kind of good stuff. First thing that they highlighted is reference types are now non-nullable. So reference types in the current state in C# are nullable. So everybody loves null reference exceptions, right? Yeah, no fans. Yeah, everybody hates null. Everybody hates null when you're not expecting it. They're really trying to design the language so it pushes you away from having null references. They want you to set a default value or do something. Don't return null. Try not to return null. It's the good citizen. One of Daniel's big points is good citizen coding practices. So don't return null because people might not check for null, and your code might melt down. You might cause their code to melt down. So yeah, they've got a whole article on this and how they're going to be dealing with it. It's up there. If you have feedback, you can give them feedback. They're actually responding with the community now as to the way they did things before, so that's great. The switch statement now supports Lambda syntax, so you can build these complex Lambda scenarios or statements to actually determine which part of the switch case you're going to use. It's great. The range operator is excellent. That allows you to walk backwards from the end of a string or a collection. So you can, I'm probably not going to do a very good job explaining it. So if you're interested in the range operator, it's the caret or the hat. You could probably find a good article on it, or even better yet, watch this talk. This is the one that I actually recommend really taking a look at. It's very information dense. I think it's only 45 minutes. And they go through how some of this impacts your code. And this is going to be coming sooner than you think. The C# team is moving pretty quick, so good thing to look at.
We can tweet these links, maybe
Yes.
to
Well,
the Toronto Twitter.
yeah. Yeah, we'll try and do our best to do a bit of a roundup. Would you make a couple notes on this so we can kind of figure out what we need to tweet? Some more work around async, because everybody knows once you've gone async, everything's async everywhere, or returning tasks at the very least. So async disposable was one that people really, really wanted to see, because of course if you're using iDisposable and you need to dispose something in an async method or an async manner, you're pretty much stuck doing synchronous code. So if you've got things that you need to await in your async in your disposable method, you can now properly await them. Default interface members. This one was really interesting to me. So this is basically almost interfaces become a bit of a hybrid between abstract classes and interfaces. It's interesting experiment. I think that this was one of the experiments. Got a pretty good round of applause from the crowd. So I think people are into it. And records. Sorry, I guess I should explain default interface members a little more. So this is if you want to make a change to an interface and add a method that wasn't there in any of the implementers of that interface, you can provide a default implementation for that interface so you don't break any of the existing dependencies. So say you've got a logger like Daniel had. So you have an iLogger class with a log method. Say you want to introduce an overload for that log method that takes in a priority or something like that. You could provide a default definition for the logger or the log overload so that you wouldn't have to go and implement that in any place that you're using the iLogger interface. So
you can have one implementation on the interface.
Yeah. So it's a pretty cool way of handling that. I thought it was pretty, it almost seems obvious after you see it, after you watch them do it, so I'm pretty sure that'll be in the language going forward. Records are interesting too. Basically, you can define a class by saying class person and defining a constructor, and then it does everything else for you implicitly. Gives you a constructor, gives you a decompose method, gives you an equity operator, gives you a properties on it. So they're experimenting with that, but I like that personally. It's super terse. Makes it really easy to define like simple models, simple POCOs. So that's pretty cool. And like I said, this link is a short presentation, super information dense. Okay, on to the mobile specific stuff. So I titled these slides Miguel's Advice. So Miguel de Casa, basically the grandfather of Xamarin. I guess he'd probably take offense to calling him a grandfather. I don't think he's that old. But if you don't know who Miguel is, Miguel actually developed GNOME. He founded Xamarin based on all his adventures in cross-platform development. And then Microsoft, of course, bought Xamarin a couple years ago. One of his quotes early in the presentation was, "Microsoft developers tend to design interfaces that are suitable to people from another galaxy," which I can kind of get behind. I've seen some pretty ugly apps. I think Windows.Forms apps were kind of the pinnacle of bad UX, where people would just throw buttons everywhere, toolbars with everything. Yeah, crazy. I know as a collective group of developers, not just Microsoft ecosystem, everybody's more focused on UX these days. Miguel talked about that. UX is super important, particularly in mobile. Mobile, you've got a space this big. You don't have a big screen and keyboard and mouse. You got this much space. So you have to be conscious of how you're using your space and the patterns you're using. Focusing on speed, looking at metrics. Who's using your app? What's going on with it? He said he threw out some stats. The average person has 10 apps that they use per day. That's quite a few. He says that ranges up to like 20 on the power user side. And so yeah, you can have quite a few apps that are active, so people are still very much using apps, which is why I balk at the fact that Microsoft ignores them in their keynote. There's 3 billion active devices, so there's 7 billion people on the planet. Almost half of them have a smartphone. Apple pulls in 1 billion in App Store revenue every year. It's a lot of money, and that's their revenue. That's not the developer cut of everything. So he talked about customer retention. He said apps must be good from day one. I completely agree with this. I try and pound this into everybody who listens to it. Most people succumb to other pressures and push apps out too early, or don't do enough testing, or don't do enough profiling. I see it far too often. The way people use apps, you usually will get way more installs than you do active users. It's a long tail kind of thing. And they found that people who have studied these metrics find that if somebody opens your app in the second week after they've installed it, they'll stay around. So 82% of those users that open it on week 2 will stick around for indefinitely. This is a really good article that Miguel had referenced. If you are building apps for the general public, I highly recommend take a look at it. All kinds of good metrics and stats in there, and ways that you can keep your users. They do a deep dive into what dissuades users and what it keeps users involved and engaged. Onboarding is pretty important. If you present a user with a login screen right after they launch your app, 50% of them will never launch your app ever again. So think long and hard before you just throw a login screen in somebody's face if it's a public-facing app. People don't like that. Provide an intro, provide a walkthrough. When you release new features, have a little carousel detailing some screenshots of the new feature. Expose people to it and really understand how to draw people in, get them using your app and loving your app right off the bat. Speaking of loving your app, if it has a poor UI, people will not love it. He gave some advice on and some resources on what we can look at to become better UX designers. Because really, everything that we're doing should be for the user. So try and gear everything towards the user. Think about design, think about the choices you're making, think about the choices you're giving your user so that they will enjoy using your app and love using your app. So there's a bunch of resources here. Joel Splosky. Joel Splosky is, I can't remember his prominence. Anybody know? Peter, do you know? Oh yeah, he is Stack Overflow, right? Yeah. He's Coding Horror. That's his blog. So Joel Splosky has a book on user interface design for programmers. It's been out for a very long time. I've not read this book, and I probably will now that Miguel has recommended it. Microsoft is trying to come up with some better design guidelines themselves. So they have a whole design guideline around inclusive design. They talk about, Microsoft has their own design language called Fluent Design. Seems interesting, relatively similar to what Google's doing with Material. So I'm sure there's some really great points in there too. Understand basically the 5 why or the 5 W's of what people are doing with your app. Where are they using it? How are they using it? With whom are they using it? Is it a game that they play with their friends and family? Is it something that they use in a mine shaft? Make sure you know exactly how people are using your app and what they're doing with it and why. Part of that is developing a persona spectrum, so put together persona cards so you can actually try and get in the headspace of your user and ensure that you're meeting their needs. He recommended some design tools. He said Miguel's favorite is paper sketches. The whiteboard is my own commentary. I love whiteboarding for UX design or UI design. I actually find it more effective than paper or pencil because you can just scrub something out with your palm and end up with a whole bunch of marker on yourself. There's all kinds of tools out there. Adobe XD is relatively new on the scene, part of the Creative Cloud suite. I haven't had a chance to use it, but I think our designers use it internally and love it. Sketch is another one that's a lot of designers and UX people love. And I said InDesign, but I meant InVision. I can't change that now. InVision is a prototyping tool, and it's pretty good for that stuff too. Testing, again, test your app, test it on bad phones. He came up with this, he had a scenario where there's a like 12-second load time for an app where it was a really, really slow phone loading all this JSON config file with this giant resource dictionary, I guess, in JSON. JSON parsing is super inefficient. It was doing it on the UI thread and just locking it on load, so on a really old Android device. So test your app on old devices. I know I've got a new phone in my pocket. Not everybody is going to. So again, know your audience and make sure that you're targeting some of those older devices. If you want an app with mass appeal, some people are going to be running like something with Android 4 on it that's like got a screen that's this big, right? So those users are out there. The metrics show that they are out there and they don't really go away. The long tail for Android is much larger than iOS. Use the profiler. I know I'm guilty of this, but run it through the memory profiler. Ensure you know what's using memory, what's using CPU, what's taking up time, and try and fix it. Try and not use your users' battery cycles and memory, and your app will have a better experience. Always ship using the optimizing compiler. Always use ahead of time compiler for Android. Pretty simple stuff. Make sure your release builds and your release configuration is set up for release. Miguel made it very clear that he does not like REST. He says JSON sucks. It does suck as far as performance goes. Human readable is always a feature though, right? So I know with what we do, having something that you can actually read is always a perk. He recommended binary JSON. Newtsoft JSON library supports binary JSON out of the box, so you can start using it right now. Google has a technology called protocol buffers, which has been around for quite a while. I've done some little experiments with that, but not well versed in it. It's again a way of compressing that data that you're communicating over HTTP to as small of a size as possible. Okay, into some of the tooling. So there's been a lot of emphasis on developer experience. They know that there's problems. So who updates Visual Studio whenever a release comes out? You people are crazy. I've learned the hard way that there's been far too many Visual Studio releases that have just broken everything. And then I'm left with, okay, well, how do I roll this back? And I have to figure out how to get the previous release. And I usually lose a day, at least. I am very, very cautious about updating Visual Studio. I have a VM that I use specifically for updates. So I have my primary VM, and I have another VM, and I update on the other VM. Make sure everything will build and run before I update my primary VM. I'm not doing that as much anymore because Microsoft had a really bad release in October, and they took a lot of flack, and they said, okay, well, we're going to test this more thoroughly. So I'm still apprehensive, but not as apprehensive. I went and installed 15.7 right away without testing it anywhere. I just installed it and went, oh, it works. This is great. I was pleasantly surprised. And then I updated the next day to 15.7.1 when it came out on Monday, and that worked too. So that was great. So they know that their developer experience has not been the greatest, and they're really trying hard to make it better. They've simplified the project template. So first thing, if you're new to Xamarin and you don't really know what you're presented with on the project new menu, they've simplified that screen. So that's the first. Agreed. They know it's important. Miguel talked about user experience and how everything has to be good from the word go, and clearly they're taking some of their own advice, because from the word go, everything's just a little bit better. They streamline Mac provisioning. So if you're using a PC and using, say, a Mac Mini, which I know a lot of people will do, or a Mac that sits in the corner and gathers dust while you use it remotely as an agent, it will now, when you're connecting to it, it will automatically tell you what you need to install, what's out of sync, and you can do it remotely from Visual Studio for Windows. So if Mono is out of date, it'll update it. If Xcode is out of date, it'll help you update it. All that kind of stuff. So that's much better. You used to just say, we're out of sync, can't do anything, go away, which was not a good experience and very frustrating. So that's improved. On the same note, now if you open up a Android project that you don't have the matching SDK, it will tell you your SDK doesn't match and prompt you to install it right then. Excellent experience, way better than having to open up the device manager, SDK manager, and then install what you need, or I guess just SDK manager, to find the checkbox that you need, expand everything out, find the checkbox, hit install, and wait for a few minutes. Now it's just one click. So that's great. They've actually replaced the device manager and the SDK manager that used to come out of the box. So Android deprecated the AVD, Android AVD, and now it's a command line utility. So Microsoft went, oh, I guess we need our own. So they built their own. It's really nice, actually. And the SDK manager is a better experience too. So you're not like trying to poke around a Java window that doesn't necessarily scale to your screen resolution or whatever. It's now a nice Microsoft supported tool. It's nice. The XAML development experience, they took all the feedback. People went, why is UWP native development or WPF development, why is it so easy to work with XAML there and so hard to work with Xamarin? Why can't you make them operate the same? So they did. So that's good. You have better autocomplete, better runtime checking, better helping, design time checking, better helping. So it'll give you tooltips and the little helpers in the margin. I can't remember what those are called. The light bulb helper deals. So that's helpful. On the Android side, better AXML designer. You can do side-by-side designing code now, which is excellent. They put a lot of thought into build performance, so things are running in parallel now. It's not, the Android build would often rebuild everything, and it didn't need to, so now it will only rebuild what needs to be rebuilt. And deployment performance is optimized as well. So Miguel did a demo on stage of firing some of this up. Actually, I should make the next one first. The Android emulator now works with Hyper-V. So what that means, who's used the Android emulators, first off? Who had to mess around with Haxim? Who didn't have an Intel processor? Yeah, it used to be a huge pain to get the Android emulator running with any type of speed. They've actually, the Xamarin team and those responsible for Android talked to the Windows kernel team and Google and solve the problem. So that you should see how fast the emulator comes up now.
It's crazy fast.
Yeah, it's like instant and right to the home screen. It's amazing, and the deployment is much faster and the build is much faster. So all that compounded, you're basically up and running in the Android emulator now as fast, or probably faster than you would in the iOS sim. I actually lean towards iOS because the simulator, getting up and running in the simulator is so much faster than trying to deploy to an Android device, just so my cadence is much faster when iterating, and looking at UI in particular. But now it looks like Android might have the lead, so definitely take a look for that. This isn't completely solidified. I was actually looking at a thread today that said still some problem with some machines. They're still working out the kinks. It's a Windows preview build, so you have to be on the inside of ring, and so it's not completely baked, but you can start using this right now if your hardware is supported. So If it is supported, I'd recommend giving it a try because it's awesome. And if it's not, just wait a while. I'm sure it'll be out quick. On the same note, there's a lot of iOS improvements. Improvements for the storyboard designer. They now support size classes, which has been a stupid pain. I still won't use Visual Studio for Mac for doing storyboards. I'll use Xcode, but that's personal preference. They've changed it so it's a full static startup, so it changed behind the scenes. So now there's less memory being consumed. The startup times are much faster. They've also worked on they've used the same concept for VS for Mac with the full static startup, and it went from 11 seconds to 7 seconds for the startup time. So think about the impact on a smaller device, is what Miguel said. Like, think about that. If it saves you 4 seconds for VS for Mac on a PC, think about how many CPU cycles that's saving, and think about how much that's going to save you on a mobile device. So it actually, speed and memory usage is now comparable to Swift, which is awesome. So they've taken a good chunk of improved the performance by like about a third, roughly a quarter to a third, and it now performs the same as Swift, which is amazing. Weak attribute replaces weak reference, so some language updates and framework updates to make your references a little easier. And yeah, this one's big. So this last point, provisioning an iOS device is now automatic using the Fastlane tools. Who has experience using Fastlane? How about that one? One's a little more rare. So Fastlane's great. Fastlane is what App Center, VSTS build tasks, and now Visual Studio use to streamline and automate some of the tasks with building or provisioning or dealing with the iOS ecosystem. So they baked that in. So it used to be 30-some steps to get a device provision. So if I unwrap a new iOS device and want to debug against it, deploy, say, just got an iPhone 10 and I want to deploy and debug on my iPhone 10. It used to take me more than an hour to get the provisioning profile and the certificates and everything lined up so I can deploy to it from a brand new app, brand new phone. Now it's, as soon as I'm signed in, it knows it's a new device. Fastlane will automatically connect into the Apple developer portal, add the provisioning profiles, download to my machine, make sure I have a right certificate, all of that. It's all done automatically. This is phenomenal. If you've used this has been out for VS for Mac for a while. It's now for VS for Windows, and I can't explain how much easier it is to do, particularly for somebody who's new to the ecosystem. Provisioning an iOS device used to be a nightmare. It even used to be a nightmare for me because I didn't have to do it that often. And now it's very easy.
You were very optimistic, only 1 hour. I did that for the iPhone the other day. It took at least 3 to 4 hours.
Yeah, it's a stupid process.
Yeah.
So I'm glad it's automated. They made some improvements around the profiler. So light allocations mode, I wrote this down. I can't remember what the hell they were talking about, so I'll skip over that one. The snapshot comparison is a little more important, so you can take one point in memory, one point in time, and compare it to another point in time and see what the delta is in what you have in memory, which is awesome. So if you've got a memory leak, it makes it easier to see exactly, oh, these things are still there and these things are new, and you can kind of see what the difference is between 2 points in time. Makes that debugging process and the memory leak identification a little easier. Okay, so now we're into some more of the framework. So the first piece is Xamarin Essentials. Who's heard of this? Anybody yet? Yeah? Well, if you're there, so good. Xamarin Essentials is, I got a sneak peek of this a little while ago, and the thought here is, okay, well, there's this plugin ecosystem that's been built for Xamarin. And all these plugins are doing things a little bit differently. So let's consolidate it. Let's make it official, an official Microsoft supported project under the Xamarin GitHub. And let's release it as one package. And Let's make sure it's all linker safe and all that kind of stuff, so it can be very efficient when you link your app and release it. So that's what they've done. So Xamarin Essentials, I think, has 21 APIs exposed across both platforms. So that's all kinds of sensor data, all kinds of storage options,
system access,
file system settings, network, camera, compass, you name it. So basically anything that makes your app like mobile, like that really differentiates it from being a piece of software that you jab at, something that's a little more aware of the environment or can use the built-in features of your phone that make these things so great. They're now exposed in one place, one library, Xamarin Essentials. It's in pre-release. I wouldn't even call it pre-release because most of these, actually all of this code came from plugins that are already have been out in the wild for a long time. So
we're using it already.
Yeah, we're using it already in a production app. So yeah, that's a big improvement. The next piece was Xamarin.Forms project F100. This was driven by they did a community sprint not too long ago where they tried to get everybody who was involved in Xamarin to identify their biggest challenges with the platform, with the framework, document it all in GitHub, and then start categorizing and getting the community to actually contribute pull requests to fix some of the issues. So Microsoft was involved, a lot of MVPs were involved, people who are heavy users were involved. They fixed a lot of them. Those will be available in one of the upcoming Xamarin.Forms releases that just wrapped up like about a month ago, so it's not fully set yet. Not all the PRs have even been processed, so that's coming. But if you want to contribute, there's a whole bunch of issues there. You can browse through if there's something that interests you or that you've dealt with or patched. Contribute to the community. They're actively looking for people to contribute. Last but not least, Xamarin.Forms 3 has finally been released to manufacturing or whatever. It's in production mode. So that's great. We'll talk more about that. So beyond build 2018, this came from again from Miguel's right from the horse's mouth kind of thing. So Elmish Xamarin.Forms is very interesting. It's a very functional based approach to building Xamarin.Forms apps. I'd looked at this briefly before. Looks really interesting, so I'll probably give that a run and see how that works. I'm sure a lot of people have heard of that. That's from Frank Kruger. He made it so you can run Xamarin.Forms in like a classic client server mode or a WebAssembly mode, so you can have essentially a Xamarin.Forms app running in your browser. Super cool. GraphQL, this is a big one. If anybody's using REST and trying to figure out, oh, I have to put another method in to get this piece of data, or I have to adjust things or whatever. GraphQL gives you a way to reach into your GraphQL API and pull out an object graph that you request. It's a very interesting way to retrieve data from a remote data storage, and I know I'm going to be using this one right away. So that's interesting. They've got some projects around that to actually bring query GraphQL right from XAML. So that's really interesting. The other thing is Xamarin.Forms Shell. This one is actually near and dear to me. I've been watching this like a hawk. If anybody's seen activity around Flutter or how Flutter works, this is basically Xamarin's answer to it. They're calling it Xamarin.Forms Shell right now. I'm really hoping they change their mind on the naming convention, because I don't think it's Xamarin.Forms at all. I think it's something completely different. It's basically a UI abstraction that doesn't have any native hooks. So you're free to do whatever you want. You're not bound to any of the native performance. You can just draw on the screen. It's essentially a game engine that sits on top of the device, but it uses a 2D UI library. So I really hope they rename that, because it's not Xamarin.Forms to me. But that one's super exciting. And I think all of this stuff is on GitHub. So I don't have links here, but I'll do a little roundup. All right, over to Xamarin.Forms 3.0. So let's take a little survey here again. Who's using Xamarin.Forms 2.5? Yeah, Who has tried 3.0? Okay, cool. All right, so there's a lot of improvements in Xamarin.Forms 3. They made like 500 or more, 500 plus bug fixes. A lot of changes to the underpinning stuff that shouldn't impact you, performance, all that kind of jazz, so that's great. But from a developer point of view, what are we really getting? So when you upgrade to this, first of all, your app's going to be faster. It'll probably be smaller as well. On top of that, you get some of these great features. So first of all, globalization. So you can now do right-to-left text and right-to-left alignment on all items in your app. So that's great if you're dealing with any right-to-left languages.
Yeah, actually, in my opinion, this demonstrates a lot of maturity on Xamarin.Forms because, I mean, a lot of the world does not read left to right, right?
Yeah.
Like there's Arabic and all of the other languages that this was a big piece of improvement that was missing for Xamarin to actually reach out to more markets, like Asian market and Middle East market.
Yeah.
So this amazing new feature.
Yeah. So if you're a company targeting like a global audience, before you wouldn't have been able to reach these people with ease, and now you can. So that's great. The next one.
Also, it would so Xamarin would reach would have this available, but you would have to go into each of the native platforms to make it work. Right now, they added this abstraction to Xamarin.Forms. So it is not that it wasn't there, it was just harder to make it happen.
Yeah.
Now it's out of the box, you can use it on Xamarin.Forms.
Yeah. And it's really easy, it's just one property in your,
you're good to go.
in your page, in your content page. The next one, there was some weird debate over this, which I didn't understand, but they brought in CSS support. So I didn't understand the debate because I didn't understand why somebody would be opposed to a feature that was very additive and introduced a DSL for styling to an engine that needed better styling support. So I don't know why people are opposed to it. I'm very for it. I'm not a huge CSS guy. You know, I learned CSS a decade ago or more, and like haven't touched it since. So I know there's all kinds of features in there that I don't understand, but I hack my way through when I need to. But I do know that it's much easier to write CSS for Xamarin.Forms than it is to write your resource dictionaries.
Yeah,
it takes like a small fraction of the code. So anything that makes your code more terse and easier to write, I'm all for it.
Easier to understand.
Yeah, easier to understand, less ceremony, all that kind of stuff. It's great. So that's big. Makes it really easy to apply styles. You can then share styles too from web and mobile, and the tooling.
Not 100%.
Yeah, not 100% of styles.
It's not 1-to-1 still.
It's a subset of CSS, so it's not true full-blown CSS, but a lot of the important things that you would expect to be there are there.
Yep.
In the tooling, they're also putting in SAS support and less support, so you can do compiled style sheets, which is awesome. So that's great. Kind of in the same vein, Flex Layout is a new layout type, which is built on or inspired by Flexbox for the web. So I don't know Flexbox because I haven't touched the web in years, but Flexbox is a really easy way of laying things up on the screen in both grid or column or row format. So they took inspiration from that, said, wow, this works really great for the web. It'd be nice if we had something like this for Xamarin.Forms, and they built it. So it's really nice. We'll show you a quick demo of that. The other one is Visual State Manager. This is more appealing to people coming from WPF and Windows development side. I don't have a lot of interest. I see it and I go, oh, that's interesting, but to me, it kind of like, to make it work with MVVM would be a bit of a thing. So, but that being said, there's a couple things in there that would be really valuable, and we'll show you some of that. All right, so we got really lazy with the demo. So I just got back from build on Thursday, and I was trying to catch up from work, and had a busy weekend. So my demos are not we're not prepped. So cheating here, but in a good way. I think you'll like this. So they released an app at the conference called the Conference Vision app.
Some of the stores where you can download it.
Yeah, it's actually not in the stores. It's on App Center and GitHub. So if you go to GitHub/Microsoft/Conference Vision, actually just open this, attempt to open this, and it won't respond to me. So you've got, of course, the source code, but there are links down here, or were links. Maybe they've just removed them. There was a link down here to get it off. Of course, it's making me look stupid. Get it off the, oh, here it is. Okay, so you can get it off the App Center. So they've exposed it through App Center. So you can play with this and install it on your iOS or Android device and kind of see some of the new features in Xamarin.Forms 3, some of the Azure features, some of that cool stuff that they're doing to demonstrate the features of the platform. So we have the source here, and I'm going to launch this on my pretend iPhone 10. So this is using, like I said, a lot of the new features from the framework. So the first thing here is the camera control, which is a custom control, custom screen. Of course, the simulator doesn't have a camera, but what this is doing is it's actually using the Visual State Manager to rearrange the buttons. Now that doesn't seem very impressive, particularly since the one button doesn't really move, it just kind of swirls around. But that is the Visual State Manager, and it's actually checking. There's a new, or actually, sorry, Xamarin Essentials has a plugin, or it's not a plugin anymore. Xamarin Essentials has a class, so you can actually check your orientation, so you don't have to do the calculation by yourself. It's just already done, and they're using that, checking that, and rearranging the screen so you can see that X moving back and forth. The big thing here that I really want to show is flex layout. So this screen would have been really painful to build previously. You could probably do it with a grid, but it would be a lot more difficult to rearrange a grid into landscape mode. And the background's not perfect, but you get the effect, like you kind of get the idea of, you can rotate this and it'll resize it to the container and rearrange things appropriately. So you can do that with a grid. You would have had to basically have a dynamic grid that calculated how many columns and rows you could possibly have, and then rearrange things dynamically when you switch orientation. Flex layout just does this automatically. So it's really nice, really smooth. I'll show you the power that we have with CSS over here in the IDE. So I'm going to use the preview window here, which is unavailable for some reason. Here we go. So the preview window is a bit of a luxury. I don't have, in my apps, I usually don't have the view hard-coded to a view model on the view level, so it doesn't know how to render anything. But in this case it does, so we can look at the preview. Looks really nice. We can make some changes here. So let's change the item. Let's make it super ugly because that's all I know how to do. If I was ever a designer, everything would look like this, which is why I'm not a designer. So you can see, like I can change the CSS here. It's referenced. Just shrink this out of the way for a minute. It's referenced in the CSS file here. It's referenced in the CSS file, and I can make those changes and see them reflected in that preview window, or if I relaunch the app, of course. Of course, we never want to have this background color green, but we might want to change the spacing for the content. I'm going to bring up the preview again. Ooh, that's bad. It's actually throwing an exception because I changed this. Change it to space around, like over here. Space between. Save this. So the CSS functionality is
Do
pretty.
the reverse one, the direction reverse.
Column reverse.
Yeah. Column reverse. Yeah. See, completely changed the
Change the
position
order.
of everything. This is really powerful because in the normal layouts that we have, would you do this with a grid, or I don't know, with a crazy stack layout?
You have to build your own control.
With grids, you have to define the rows and the columns, and if you had to change the flow of the layout, you would actually have to go through the layout, changing all of the columns of all of the elements. Now you can just reverse, and you got everything upside down if you want.
So I said no wrap, so it's trying to squeeze everything on screen. See, everything's just in one row.
It's a really powerful new layout that they got.
Yeah, it's very nice, big improvement. So the code for that is pretty straightforward.
There's a few blogs that we can retweet about these updates too.
Yeah.
There's actually some Xamarin University classes on YouTube, open in YouTube, that they cover all of these updates and actually like proper lectures on each of the new features. It's really cool.
So
Can we take those as well?
So they're using a handmade repeater view. So a repeater view is just like a bindable layout container, so you can have a repeated item within it. We're actually using this all over our app too, apps. So you can see that there's a class set here for container. So this is set to be a flexible container, and then the items are set to be flexible items. I'll bring that style sheet up again here. So we've got it set as a container to be a flex container. So as soon as you tell it you're going to use a flex direction row, treats that as a flex container, and then anything below that, of course, is going to be a flex item. So underneath that, there's just basic styling, margin, height, width, all that stuff you'd expect. So yeah, that's the flex layout and styling. Like I said, those are the two features to me that I'm gonna be using all the time. So I figured that was the most important one to get out here. The Visual State Manager is it's a little bit different. You basically define a couple states. You can do that through XAML or in code, and then you just tell it to swap between the two states on the screen. Kind of interesting, but not as interesting to me as that powerful layout control. You could have done this like relatively straightforward way before using a Boolean flag or something like that. But the flex layout, whole new layout rendering engine is a big hit in my book. Anything else we should cover from there or back in? All right, I think I have one more thing here. So check out the Xamarin.Forms roadmap. They just updated this the other day. after a build. So they've got everything that they're intending on building the next, I think, 3 releases up on there now that they've shipped 3.0. So there's a lot of good stuff on there. Like I said, they are looking for contributors. So personally, I'm going to go look through all the features and issues and see if there's something I can tear off, because I'd love to contribute to Xamarin.Forms.
What is really cool on the Microsoft repos is that they have a couple of tags that they put in the issues. So one of them is a good first issue tag. They usually put those tags on issues for whoever wants to contribute, just grabs that issue and works on it. And there's another one, I don't recall it right now.
Help wanted. That's the other one right there. That's
Okay,
like
so good first issue and
help wanted.
help wanted, exactly. So they actually use these tags
Yeah.
on their project. So if you're ever going through GitHub and feel like doing some code and contributing to the community,
Yeah.
those are good tips to follow.
Very cool stuff. Okay, so the next one, I really wanted to demo this. So if you didn't catch this, James Montemagno demoed in one of the earlier sessions at Build, he demoed Xamarin Live Reload. So this is something that the community has been asking for a very long time. Basically, to be able to launch your app, maintain state, and make UI changes with that state maintained. So similar to the way some of these other new frameworks like Flutter are working, want to be able to work on the app as it has data and state loaded into it and change things with the UI. So he demoed it, worked very well for his demo. I spent far too much time trying to get this to work, emailing back and forth with Microsoft, sending them logs, no good. So it didn't work for me. It's still in preview. I'm sure they're working on it, because I know they're working on it because they're working with me to solve my problem. They just couldn't solve it for right now. So I'll report back on this, but this is very important. I'm just going to play a YouTube video of it in action. But the idea is you can change your XAML right now. So with this plugin working, it doesn't work on my machine, but on the machines it works on, you can change your XAML and it will update on the app that you're debugging in real time without impacting state. So very good if you're designing your UI and working on your UI. In the future, they will have it using Roslyn hooks, so you can actually change your code and
C# code.
Yeah, your C# code, and live reload that. That's their next milestone. Actually, I'm sure the next milestone is getting something workable out in my hands. But
So the big thing is that right now, whenever so if you're not using
Live Player,
which only allows you to edit your XAML, your actual UI. If you're not using that, you actually have to rebuild your app whenever you do some change on the XAML or on the C#. They brought this tool so that we can build it once and change as much as we need, and we will always have that as visual UI and the state of the app reloading. So you can actually change your code and see things coming to life and changing your app. There are some tools, not Xamarin, in the market that has this as a big features. Flutter is one of them. If I'm not mistaken, Cordova does that, but it doesn't retain the state. So if you reload, you actually reload up to a certain point. So if you open a picker and you do a reload, that picker will be gone, but the UI changes that will reflect. So yeah, this is a huge new tool that they're bringing.
yeah, to me this is the finally after working with this for 3 years, I wish they would have put this in. I wish this was in from day one, because yeah, you want to focus on UI, but it's very hard to focus on UI when it takes so long to iterate. So here's the demo. There's no sound or anything. Some comments up the navigation page, and its tab reloads with another tab.
pastes list view,
List view code.
saves, and there's the list view.
List view.
And notice that he's debugging. He has his debugging session on.
You need Windows laptop.
Yeah.
That might actually be the issue.
So he's changing the styles, he's adding new new XAML objects, and everything is being reflected on the app. Changing the font size. It's reloading. It's awesome. And see that the keyboard doesn't vanish.
So I spent all my time prepping for demos trying to get this working because I think this is, aside from the live share, this was the best thing that I saw it build. From my perspective, as somebody who uses Xamarin.Forms and uses it every day, I need this tool. It's going to make my life much easier. Not quite ready for prime time. When it is, I will send a message out on Meetup and Twitter and broadcast it through the world because I really, really want this feature.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's where all my demo time, all my demo prep went, was in that. And sending all kinds of log dumps to Microsoft. So yeah, that was fun. It's actually great to be able to know who to reach out to on the Microsoft team. If anybody has issues with the tooling or anything like that, if you can't find who you need to talk to, I might be able to help. I got to meet a lot of people and get to know who was responsible for what while I was at Build, which was very useful because I could, complain about all my issues. So, and continue to complain into this week via email now. So now I bet they're all regretting meeting me. So that's fun. I think that's it.
Yeah.
So thank you all for coming. Thank you to BSI Labs for everything that they provide, basically make this event happen. I hope this was useful to anybody. If you've got any more questions or anything or want any further information, please let us know. Daniel and I can try and provide the links or relevant material to try and get you up and running with what you need. And thanks very much.
Yeah, awesome.